William Harrison is my seventh cousin, 6 times removed. Harrison was the seventh and youngest child of Benjamin Harrison V and Elizabeth Bassett Harrison, born on February 9, 1773, at Berkeley Plantation, the home of the Harrison family of Virginia on the James River in Charles City County. He would become the last American president not born as an American citizen. The Harrisons were a prominent political family of English descent whose ancestors had been in Virginia since the 1630s. His father was a Virginia planter who served as a delegate to the Continental Congress 1774 to 1777 and who signed the Declaration of Independence. His father also served in the Virginia legislature as the 5th governor of Virginia, 1781 to 1784, in the years during and after the American Revolutionary War. Harrison's older brother, Carter Bassett Harrison, represented Virginia in the House of Representatives 1793 to 1799. William Henry often referred to himself as a child of the Revolution, as indeed he was, having grown up in the home just 30 miles from where Washington won the war against the British in the Battle of Yorktown. Harrison was tutored at home until age 14 when he attended Hampton Sidney College, a Presbyterian college in Virginia. He studied there for 3 years, receiving a classical education that included Latin, Greek, French, logic, and debate. His Episcopalian father removed him from the college, possibly for religious reasons, and after brief stays at an academy in Southampton County, Virginia, and with his elder brother Benjamin in Richmond, he went to Philadelphia in 1790. His father died in the spring of 1791, and he was placed in the care of Robert Morris, an intimate family friend in Philadelphia. He studied medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. During his time in Penn, he studied with Dr. Benjamin Rush, a founding father of the United States and a Penn professor of chemistry and medicine, and William Shippen Sr. His older brother inherited their father's money, so he lacked the funds for his further medical schooling, which he had also discovered he didn't prefer. He therefore withdrew from Penn, though through a college archive record him as a non-graduate alumnus of Penn's medical school class of 1793. With the influence of his father's friend, Governor Henry Lee III, he embarked upon a military career. On August 16, 1791, within 24 hours of meeting Lee, Harrison, age 18, was commissioned as an ensign in the Army and assigned to the 1st American Regiment. He was initially assigned to Fort Washington, Cincinnati, in the Northwest Territory, where the Army was engaged in the ongoing Northwest Indian War. Harrison was promoted to lieutenant after Major General Mad Anthony Wayne took command of the Western Army in 1792. Following a disastrous defeat under Arthur St. Clair, in 1793 he became Wayne's aide-de-camp and acquired the skills to command the army on the frontier. He participated in Wayne's decisive victory at the Battle of Fallen Timbers on August 20th, 1794, which ended the Northwest Indian War. He received the following commendation from Wayne for his role in the battle. I must add the name of my faithful and gallant aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Harrison, who rendered the most essential service by communicating my orders in every direction, conduct, and bravery, exciting the troops to press for victory. Harrison was a signatory of the Treaty of Grenville, 1795. As witness to Wayne, the principal negotiator of the U.S., under the terms of the treaty, a coalition of Indians ceded a portion of their lands to the federal government, opening 2/3 of Ohio to settlement. At his mother's death in 1793, Harrison inherited a portion of his family's Virginia estate, including approximately 3,000 acres of land and several slaves. He was serving in the army at the time and sold the land to his brother. Harrison was promoted to captain in May 1797 and resigned from the army on June 1st, 1798. Harrison met Anna Symmes of North Bend, Ohio in 1795 when he was 22. She was a daughter of Anna Tuthill and Judge John Cleves Symmes, who served as a colonel in the Revolutionary War and as a representative to Congress of the Confederation. Harrison asked the judge for permission to marry Anna, but was refused, so the couple waited until Symmes left on business. They then eloped and were married on November 25th, 1795 at the North Bend home of Stephen Wood, treasurer of the Northwest Territory. They honeymooned at Fort Washington. Harrison was still on military duty. Judge Symmes confronted him 2 weeks later at a farewell dinner for General Wayne, sternly demanding to know how he intended to support a family. Harrison responded, "By my sword and my own right arm, sir." The match was advantageous for Harrison, as he eventually exploited his father-in-law's connections with land speculators, which facilitated his departure from the army. Judge Symmes' doubts about him persisted as he wrote to a friend, "He can neither bleed, plead, nor preach, and if he could plow, I should be satisfied." Matters eventually became cordial with the father-in-law. Later sold the Harrisons 160 acres of land in North Bend, which enabled Harrison to build a home and start a farm. Anna was frequently in poor health during the marriage, primarily because of her many pregnancies, yet she outlived William by 23 years, dying on February 25, 1864 at age 88. The Harrisons had 10 children: Elizabeth Bassett, 1796 to 1846, John Cleves Symmes, 1798 to 1830, Lucy Singleton, 1800 to 1826, William Henry Jr., 1802 to 1838, John Scott, 1804 to 1878, Benjamin, 1806 to 1840, Mary Symmes, 1809 to 1842, Carter Bassett, 1811 to 1839, Anna Tuthill, 1813 to 1865, James Findlay, 1814 to 1817. Harrison began his political career when he temporarily resigned from the military on June 1, 1798, and campaigned among his friends and family for a post in the Northwest Territorial Government. His close friend Timothy Pickering was serving as Secretary of State, and along with George Symmes' influence, he was recommended to replace Winthrop Sargent, the outgoing Territorial Secretary. President John Adams appointed Harrison to the position in July 1798. The work of recording the activities of the territory was tedious, and he soon became bored and sought a position in the U.S. Congress. Harrison had many friends in the Eastern aristocracy and quickly gained a reputation among them as a frontier leader. He ran a successful horse breeding enterprise that won him acclaim throughout the Northwest Territory. Congress had legislated a territorial policy that led to high land cost, a primary concern for settlers in the territory. Harrison became their champion to lower those prices. The Northwest Territory's population reached a sufficient number to have a congressional delegate in October 1799, and Harrison ran for election. He campaigned to encourage further migration to the territory, which eventually led to the statehood. Harrison defeated Arthur St. Clair Jr. by one vote to become the Northwest Territory's first congressional delegate in 1798 at age 26, and served in the 6th United States Congress from March 4, 1799 to May 14, 1800. He had no authority to vote on legislative bills, but he was permitted to serve on a committee to submit legislation and to engage in debate. He became chairman of the Committee on Public Lands and promoted the Land Act of 1800, which made it easier to buy Northwest Territory land in smaller tracts at a lower cost. Freeholders were permitted to buy smaller lots with a down payment of only 5%, and this became an important factor in the territory's rapid population growth. Harrison was also instrumental in arranging the division of the territory into two sections. The eastern section continued to be known as the Northwest Territory and consisted of Ohio and eastern Michigan. The western section was named the Indiana Territory and consisted of Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, a portion of western Michigan, and the eastern portion of Minnesota. The two new territories were formally established by law in 1800. On May 13, 1800, President John Adams appointed Harrison as the governor of the Indiana Territory, based on his ties to the West and his apparent neutral political stance. He served in this capacity for 12 years. His governorship was confirmed by the Senate, and he resigned from Congress to become the first Indiana territorial governor in 1801. Harrison began his duties on January 10, 1801, at Vincennes, the capital of the Indiana Territory. Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were members of the Democratic Republican Party, and they reappointed him as governor in 1803, 1806, and 1809. In 1804, Harrison was assigned to administer the civilian government of the District of Louisiana. He conducted the district's affairs for 5 weeks until the Louisiana Territory was formally established on July 4, 1805, and Brigadier General James Wilkinson assumed the duties of governor. In 1805, Harrison built a plantation-style home near Vincennes that he named Graceland in tribute to the birds on the property. The 26-room home was one of the first brick structures in the territory, and it served as a center of social and political life in the territory during his tenure as governor. Harrison founded a university at Vincennes in 1801, which was incorporated as Vincennes University on November 29, 1806. The territorial capital was eventually moved to Corydon in 1813, and Harrison built a second home at nearby Harrison Valley. Harrison's primary responsibility was to obtain title to Indian lands that would allow future settlement and increase the territory's population, a requirement for statehood. He was also eager to expand the territory for personal reasons, as his political fortunes were tied to Indiana's eventual statehood. While benefiting from land speculation on his own behalf and acquiring 2 milling operations, he was credited as a good administrator with significant improvements in roads and other infrastructure. When Harrison was reappointed as the Indiana Territorial Governor on February 8, 1803, he was given expanded authority to negotiate and conclude treaties with the Indians. The 1804 Treaty of St. Louis with Guimi required the Sioux and Waukee tribes to cede much of western Illinois and parts of Missouri's land. Many of the Sioux resented the loss of lands, especially their leader Black Hawk. Harrison thought that the Treaty of Grossland, 1805, appeased some of the Indians, but tensions remained high along the frontier. The Treaty of Fort Wayne in 1809 raised new tensions when Harrison purchased more than 2.5 million acres from the Potawatomi, Delaware, and Miami, and Eel River tribes. Some Indians disputed the authority of the tribes joining the treaty. Harrison was also able to conduct matters unquestioned by the government as the administration changed hands from Jefferson to Madison. He pursued the treaty process aggressively, offering large subsidies to the tribes and their leaders so as to gain political favor with Jefferson before his departure. Biographer Freeling asserts that the Indians perceived the ownership of land was as common to all, just as the air that is breathed. In 1805, Harrison succeeded in acquiring for the nation as many as 51 million acres from the Indians after plying 5 of their chiefs with alcohol for no more than $1 per 20,000 acres, and compromising 2/3 of Illinois and sizable chunks of Wisconsin and Missouri. In addition to resulting tensions with the Indians, Harrison's pro-slavery position made him unpopular with the Indian Treaty's abolitionists, as he tried in vain to encourage slavery in the territory. In 1803, he had lobbied Congress to temporarily suspend for 10 years Article 6 of the Northwest Ordinance prohibiting slavery in the Indiana Territory. Though Harrison asserted that the suspension was necessary to promote settlement and make the territory economically viable and ready for statehood, the proposal failed. Lacking the suspension of Article 6 in 1807, the territorial legislature, with Harrison's support, enacted laws that authorized indentured servitude. It gave masters authority to determine the length of service. When Harrison came to Washington, he wanted to show that he was still the steadfast hero of Tippecanoe, and that he was a better educated and more thoughtful man than the backwards character portrayed in the campaign. He took the oath of office on Thursday, March 4th, 1841, a cold and wet day. He braved the chilly weather and chose not to wear an overcoat or hat. He rode on horseback to the grand ceremony and then delivered the longest inaugural address in American history at 8,445 words. It took him nearly 2 hours to read, although his friend and fellow Whig Daniel Webster had edited it for length. The inaugural address was a detailed statement of the Whigs' agenda, a repudiation of Jackson's and Van Buren's policies, and the first and only formal articulation by Harrison of his approach to the presidency. The address began with Harrison's sincere regard for the truth being placed in him. However strong may be my present purpose to realize the expectations of a magnanimous and confiding people, I too well understand the dangerous temptations to which I shall be exposed from the magnitude of the power which it has been the pleasure of the people to commit to my hands, not to place my chief confidence upon the aid of that almighty power which has hitherto protected me and enabled me to bring to favorable issues other important but still greatly inferior trusts theretofore confided to me by my country. Harrison promised to reestablish the Bank of the United States and extend its capacity for credit by issuing paper currency in Henry Clay's American system. He intended to rely on the judgment of Congress in legislative matters, using his veto power only if an act were unconstitutional, and to revise Jackson's spoils system of executive patronage. He promised to use patronage to create a qualified staff, not to enhance his own standing in government, and under no circumstances would he run for a second term. He condemned the financial excesses of the prior administration and pledged not to interfere with congressional financial policy. All in all, Harrison committed to a weak presidency, deferring to the first branch, the Congress, in keeping with Whig principles. He addressed the nation's already hotly debated issue of slavery. As a slaveholder himself, he agreed with the right of states to control the matter. The lines, too, separating powers to be exercised by the citizens of one state from those of another seem to be so distinctly drawn as to leave no room for misunderstanding. The attempt of those of one state to control the domestic institutions of another can only result in the feelings of distrust and jealousy. As he was about to conclude his remarks, Harrison incorporated his reliance upon the country's freedom of religion while taking pains to present himself as part of the religious mainstream rather than a dissenter or member of a minority faith. I deem the present occasion sufficiently important and solemn to justify me in expressing to my fellow citizens a profound reverence for the Christian religion, a thorough conviction that sound morals, religious liberty, and a just sense of religious responsibility are essentially connected with all true and lasting happiness, and to that good bearing who has blessed us by the gifts of civil and religious freedom, who watched over the labors of our fathers, and has hitherto preserved to us institutions far exceeding in excellence those of any other people. Let us unite fervently, commending every interest of our beloved country in all future time. The Harrison Cabinet. Vice President John Taylor, Secretary of State Daniel Webster, Secretary of Treasury Thomas Ewing, Secretary of War John Bell, Attorney General John J. Crittenden, Postmaster General Francis Granger, Secretary of the Navy George Edmund Badger. Harrison took seriously his pledge to reform executive appointments, visiting each of the 6 cabinet departments to observe its operation and ensuring through Webster an order that electioneering by employees would be considered grounds for dismissal. He resisted pressure from other Whigs over partisan patronage. A group arrived in his office on March 16 to demand the removal of all Democrats from any appointed office. His own cabinet attempted to countermand his appointment of John Chambers as governor of the Iowa Territory in favor of Webster's friend James Wilson. Webster attempted to press this decision at a March 25th cabinet meeting, and Harrison asked him to read aloud a handwritten note which said simply, "William Henry Harrison, President of the United States." Harrison then stood and declared, "William Henry Harrison, President of the United States, tells you, gentlemen, that by God, John Chambers shall be governor of Iowa. Harrison's only other official decision of consequence was whether to call Congress into a special session. He and Clay had disagreed over the necessity of such a session, and Harrison's cabinet proved evenly divided. Clay pressed him on the special session on March 13th, but Harrison rebuffed him and told him not to visit the White House again, to address him only in writing. A few days later, however, Treasury Secretary Thomas Ewing reported to Harrison that federal funds were in such trouble until Congress regularly scheduled session in December. Harrison thus relented and proclaimed the special session on March 17. In the interest of the condition of the revenue and finance of the country, the session would have begun on May 31st as scheduled if Harrison had lived. Harrison had been physically worn down by many persistent office seekers and a demanding social schedule. On Wednesday, March 24, 1841, Harrison took his daily morning walk to local markets without a coat or hat. Despite being caught in a sudden rainstorm, he did not change his wet clothes upon returning to the White House. On Friday, March 26, Harrison became ill with cold-like symptoms and sent for his doctor, Thomas Miller, though he told the doctor he felt better after having taken medicine for fatigue and mental anxiety. The next day, Saturday, the doctor was called again and arrived to find Harrison in bed with a severe chill after taking another early morning walk. Miller applied mustard plaster to his stomach and gave him a mild laxative, and he felt better that afternoon. At 4 a.m. Sunday, March 28th, Harrison developed severe pain in the side, and the doctor initiated bloodletting. The procedure was terminated when there was a drop in his pulse rate. Miller also applied heated cups to the president's skin to enhance blood flow. The doctor then gave him castor oil and medicines to induce vomiting and diagnosed him with pneumonia in the right lung. A team of doctors was called in Monday, March 29, and they confirmed right lower lobe pneumonia. Harrison was then administered laudanum, opium, and camphor, along with wine and brandy. No official announcements were made concerning Harrison's illness, which fueled public speculation and concern the longer he remained out of public view. Washington society noticed his uncharacteristic absence from church on Sunday. Conflicting and unconfirmed newspaper reports were based on leaks by people with contacts in the White House. In fact, Harrison's condition was seriously weakened, and cabinet members and family were summoned to the White House. His wife Anna had remained in Ohio due to her own illness. According to papers in Washington on Friday, Harrison had rallied despite a Baltimore Sun report that his condition was of more serious character. A reporter for the New York Commercial indicated that the country's people were deeply distressed, and many of them in tears. In the evening of Saturday, April 3, Harrison developed severe diarrhea and became delirious, and at 8:30 p.m. he uttered his last words to his attending doctor, assumed to be for Vice President John Taylor. "Sir, I wish you to understand the true principles of the government. I wish them carried out. I ask nothing more." Harrison died at 12:30 a.m. on April 4th, 1841, Palm Sunday, 9 days after becoming ill and exactly 1 month after taking the oath of office. He was the first president to die in office. Harrison's wife Anna was still in Ohio packing for the trip to Washington when she learned of her loss. Anna never moved into the White House. Harrison's daughter-in-law, Jane Irwin Harrison, widow of Harrison's son, had served as hostess of the White House in Anna's place while Harrison was president. A 30-day period of mourning commenced following the president's death. The White House hosted various public ceremonies modeled after European royal funeral practices. An invitation-only funeral service was also held on April 7 in the East Room of the White House, after which Harrison's coffin was brought to Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., where it was placed in the public vault. The next day, there was a great pageant in Washington. The roar of cannon and the tolling of bells filled the air, while many houses were shrouded with crape, and the streets were black with people as the day advanced. The procession made its appearance, coming slowly through the avenue, carriage after carriage, in long succession, while thousands upon thousands followed on foot, all moving to the sound of melancholy music. They were bearing the dead body of Harrison to the grave. I remember distinctly how the window glass would break and rattle to the ground after each report of the cannon they were firing in the burial ground. That June, Harrison's body was transported by train and river barge to North Bend, Ohio, and he was buried on July 7 at the summit of Mount Nebo, which is now the William Henry Harrison Tomb Site Memorial. Among Harrison's most enduring legacies is the series of treaties that he negotiated and signed with Indian leaders during his tenure as the Indiana Territorial Governor. As part of the treaty negotiations, the tribes ceded large tracts of land in the West, which provided additional acreage for the purchase and settlement of the nation. Harrison's long-term impact on American policies included his campaigning methods, which laid the foundation of modern presidential campaign tactics. Harrison died nearly penniless, and Congress voted his wife, Anna, a presidential widow's pension of $25,000. 1 year of Harrison's salary, equivalent to about $709,000 in 2022. She also received the right to mail letters free of charge. Freeling refers to Harrison as the most dominant figure in the evolution of the Northwest Territories into the upper Midwest today. Harrison, at age 68, at the time of inauguration, was the oldest person to assume the U.S. presidency, a distinction he held until 1981, when Ronald Reagan was inaugurated at age 69. Harrison's son, John Scott Harrison, represented Ohio in the House of Representatives between 1853 and 1857. Harrison's grandson, Benjamin Harrison of Indiana, served as the 23rd president from 1889 to 1893, making William and Benjamin Harrison the only grandparent and grandchild pair of presidents. Anna Harrison did not like her husband's successor, President John Tyler. She lobbied him to give political appointments to members of her family. Leveraging her status as a former First Lady, she likewise lobbied the following president, James K. Polk, to give military commissions to her grandsons. Harrison was granted a pension by the federal government in June 1841, but it was spent paying debts that her husband had accumulated. Harrison became more involved in politics and religion in her later years. During the Civil War, she was a supporter of abolitionism, and she encouraged her grandsons to serve in the Union Army. In 1855, Harrison's cabin was destroyed in a fire, and she spent her final years living with her son John. Harrison died on February 25, 1864, at the age of 88. She was buried beside her husband in North Bend. The sermon was preached by Horace Bushnell.